So hello, my name is Євген Мокеєв. I am from Kyiv, Ukraine. Long-time fan of RPGs, game master, also writing my own models, and I very much like Philippus games. I like Western, Forbidden Lands, Symbaroum.
Okay, and I'm Erik Granström. I'm right now in Åland Island, which belongs to Finland, and I have written the world for Forbidden Lands and also two campaigns called Raven's Purge and the Blood March. The Blood March, yes, not plural.
Yeah.
And also I have a long history in older role-playing games were very big in Sweden in the 80s and 90s. So I was around at the time, and then it returned now lately, and then I got involved in it again. Actually, I didn't count on that. So I don't know if you know the background to Forbidden Lands, how it came about at all.
Yeah, I would very much like to tell me about it, and maybe about that era, the 80s, because what we know about the Sweden RPGs, I know that Dragonbane the Monarch was a very big thing, and it's released now. So.
And now Dragonbane, of course, is back, which is Dragonbane the Monarch, the old Swedish game. I think it's the 5th iteration. So that will be released this fall now soon. So I was not involved in that one, but I might become involved. I suspect that I will be involved somehow in the future, because I wrote stuff for the first iteration of the game, and that might come back in one way or the other, I think.
Nice. So how Forbidden Lands came? What was like the origin of this game?
Of Drakar och Demoner? You mean the old one?
Yeah, we can start as old one and then go to Forbidden Lands.
Yeah, I had a friend. I was a student at the time, and I had a friend who brought it home, Dungeons and Dragons from the US. And that was the first version of Dungeons and Dragons. You had these supplements called, I think, Greyhawk and Chainmail. They're very basic. The rules were very primitive. But he brought it to Sweden, and there was no role-playing game in Sweden at the time. So we started to play that pretty early. And after a year or so, I became a game master, dungeon master, and I wrote my own material. And then Drakar och Demoner in Sweden came a couple of years later, and a friend of mine was writing for that game. So he suggested that, why don't you take your stuff and publish it? So I contacted, it was called Äventyrsspel, Adventure Games, the company behind that. I contacted them and asked them, are you interested? And they were. And that person that had then sent the material is Anders Blixt, which is pretty well known in Sweden in role-playing games as well. So he's still around too. We're kind of two old patriarchs. And now I've become very much involved in Forbidden Lands, of course, because the thing was Free League Publishing that, is around very much nowadays. They started out as a group of friends and were doing third-party material for a game called Svavelvinter in Swedish, which was based on my old games. So it's kind of complicated. I wrote these old games in the 80s and 90s, but then I wrote novels in the same setting. So that's 4 novels on total 2,300 pages, so pretty big. And then they made a game from the novels, the same name again. So the Free League Publishing, their first game was Svavelvinter, which was based on my novels. And then they have grown and started with, as you know, many other games. And they published an art book with art of Nils Gulliksson, who made the original art for Drakar the Demoner in the 80s and 90s. And in this art book that was kickstarted, they had a stretch goal, which was, we will make a game from the artwork, a new game from the artwork. And they reached that stretch goal, and then a couple of years later, they started, okay, so now we will do this game. So and then I got the question. I got all the old material from Nils Gulliksson, his art book, and they said, can you do a new game with this? You have to use the old pictures, but you can do whatever you like with them. And that became Forbidden Lands. So what I did was I took the elves and the dwarves and the halflings, and I thought, can I do something else with these?
Okay, so you had some interesting constraints, like you were given the art, like decided the races which you have to use in your world, and you built through that?
Yeah, I had to use. So a lot of the art in Forbidden Lands, the original books, is old. As you can see, it says in the 80s or something. If you look at the pictures, you can see which ones are old. And then in the supplements, we had came out this the Blood March that came now. That's totally new art, but it's kind of black and white and a little the same style. So that's how that came about. And it was very interesting. Like you say, if you have constraints, that often, to me, my experience is very good to have constraints when you're fantasizing about something, because then you get more creative how to use that. If you can start with a blank page, it's much harder to start with a blank page and do whatever you like. But you have to be like this. You have to be this format, only 4 pages or so, and then okay, I have to focus on that.
Nice. Yeah. For me, it's still very hard to start with blank page. Usually, it's much easier when I have some sort of hooks to write a story, and guess the same with the word. And you have art to inspire you, so it's very nice. Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you a bit more about what's lies ahead for Forbidden Lands. So recently, there's 2 big releases came out: the Blood March and the Monster Book. Yeah. And it's interesting. Which region do you plan to explore next? Which part of this world?
Yes, that is Alderland. As you know, the first game, if you played the game, it starts in Ravenland. Yeah. It was the original map, and then now we have Asleen, which is the Blood March, which is to the west. To the west, yes. Yeah. And then Alderland is the land which is south of these 2. So all 3 of these countries will connect, and you will be able to travel between them.
Yeah, as I remember, Alderland is behind the Iron Lock, yeah? It's to the south.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. So that's already mentioned in the game, in the first game. And now it opens up, so you move to Alderland, and you will... what happened in the other 2 expansions will affect what happens in Alderland. So if you play the game and it came out differently, of course, for every group, then you can use that. My aim is that you can use that when you go into Alderland, so you can... It's not set which parties will invade. It's got to be an invasion of Alderland, basically. So, because everybody dislikes Alderland because they have been the bad guys to the other 2 for many hundreds of years. So, but Alderland is mostly a human-centric country, which is more civilized than the other 2. It's more like farmlands and cities, because in the other 2 we don't really have any cities. One is nomad land, and the other one is just wilderness. So now we'll have to introduce cities as well. Then.
Yeah, it will be an interesting change of atmosphere and setting.
Yes, I would ask how this will... I'm not a rules person. I only make the fantasy, the setting and the story. And then I have other people doing the rules, because I'm not very amused by rules in the first place. So we will have to find... I think that cities will be one new type of terrain. So you will have, when you go into city, you will have tables, you can see what happens and what's there and so on. So that's going to be interesting. It's going to be some new aspects, of course.
Excited to see this. I actually wanted to ask about not the rules themselves, but your connection to it. Like Forbidden Lands, it's very well known for its excellent travel rules. Yes. And did it influence your work? For example, the big encounter table, did you write it? Like for people to connect with the world?
Yeah, many encounters, yes. But then when I wrote the story about Ravenland, Forbidden Lands, there were no rules. The rules were made afterwards. So when I wrote the adventure site, the first ones and so on, I got some specifications, but I hadn't seen any rules. So they had to sort of adjust what I wrote to the rules afterwards. So, but I understand that they fit very well together, which is very nice to hear. So we've been working together for a long time, me and Thomas Eirenstam and the other guys at Free Leagues Publishing. And they are also very well. They have played the old games, so we know each other pretty well. So, but one big part of these expansions are the random encounters, of course, because that can get your adventure going. Something happens, and then you can build on that as a game master and see what happens. So it's...
Yeah, I think like the main 2 points through which people like interact and connect with the game world, it's random encounters and it's legends, of course. So I suspect you also wrote legends for books.
Yeah. So one of the specifications for the game was that it was to be very open. So you were supposed to be able to play anybody, and you were supposed to side with any party, so you can side with the bad guys or the good guys or the guys in between. Most parties in these games are not very good or bad. They are just self-interested. So you can pick what you want to be, and it had to work for that. So there's no. It's not like one side will win the struggles, but you don't know who will win. And that's part of the thing. And that's some people get frustrated about that. They want to know how it is and what happens. And I say, well, that's you don't know what will happen in our world. So this is the same here. It will happen. It will become what you make it and what happens to be, sort of.
Yeah, it's not a book, like it's not a novel. It's it's a fantasy setting, and you don't know what will happen.
Absolutely. And I wrote in several novels as well, and that's totally different because then I decide what will happen, of course. But it's very good when I have written games. It's that affects me writing novels because I tend to think in scenarios when I write the novels. Okay, if we go that way, what will happen? Not good. Okay. Oh, if we go that way or that way, and then I can sort of build different scenarios and choose the ones I think are interesting in the novels too. But
no, nice. It was one of my next questions, like how it's different to write a book from writing a setting, and you already began talking about that. So both improves other things. If you're a good novelist, you're better at writing settings, and if you're good at writing settings, you can think in scenarios and then use that in your writing work.
They are fruitful for each other. I get things from the gaming side and from the novel side as well. So it's you usually when you write games, you try to find new angles. You don't want it to look like every other game. You want to find something new in there. And like in the games I've tried, there was a discussion about the unreliable narrator style that I use in Forbidden Lands. That when you get the history section and you read that, it's not certain that this is the way it was. This is just how it is. The history is told by one party. And then something happens that, wait a minute, that doesn't fit with the history. No, because the history was wrong. So this is what happened. And things happen and people try to fit it into their stories, right? So that's something I try. And that is, I think, the way often the world works as well. So every party tries to build their own story about what actually happens, of course. So
actually, which advice would you give to people who want to create their own game setting? Like also start with something, with art, like you.
Yeah, it's very good to have a core of something because it's very hard to just come up with something. So absolutely. And what I do for inspiration is I read a lot of history and philosophy and so on. So I don't read a lot of fantasy because I think if I use fantasy to create fantasy, then it becomes generic very easily. So there's very much to get from history. You can get fantastic stories. And also, for instance, in this, I don't know if you read the Blood March yet.
I have only read the Ravenland one, Raven's Purge. I am finishing reading that.
For instance, you can encounter a mad composer in a sort of demon jungle that plays, and it seems that he has murdered his family. I'm spoiling a little, not much though. Anyway, that composer is actually a historical person from Italy in the 1500s that did this. So and his name is also similar to the real person. So I can read his story and then I can adapt it for the game.
Nice. I think my favorite character from the Raven's Purge is Marigal, the bard. Was he inspired also by someone? Or?
Marigal, I think I like him a lot, or her. It's you don't know if it's a her or he. It can change. It can change sex. So I think it's partly inspired by, Neil Gaiman's Sandman series.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
I made a sort of, I like to build, I like to take things, small pieces of other creations and also of the real world and put them into the game as a kind of, wing. And I've tried to get Neil Gaiman's The Eternals, these 7 characters that all start with a D, Dream, the Sandman series, basically. So Marigal is mostly based on Desire, the character Desire of the Sandman series. But of course, then he or her has evolved, but it's kind of same type of person. I think Desire has yellow eyes as well, and he's kind of both good and bad, and you can't really trust this being because...
Nice.
And actually, Crasula, there's a big bad demon in there. Is mostly based on the character Despair in the Sandman series, which is also one of the siblings.
Nice. So that leaves us, if you take the big sword, it leaves us with the gopher. And
I think it's more created from scratch. That does. I take things from all places. Yeah. I'm from start. I was trained as a veterinarian, so I use a lot of that for the. I have a lot of use for my veterinary background when it comes to blood and gore and diseases and things, and also behavior of different species, to think, what would wolfkin behave like? Then I can go to my animals and think, okay, what if a dog was intelligent as a human? How would it function? How would it function socially in his group and so on? So I think that's very rewarding to take something, whatever really, that you're familiar with and try to put it into a fantasy setting.
Yeah, actually, I think Wolfkin is something unique for Forbidden Lands. At least I didn't saw something similar in other games. Was this also part of the original art pack, or you created it?
Yes, I mean, there was a Wolfkin in the old Drakar Demoner, actually. So I had them, but I made them a little differently in Forbidden Lands, of course, because I remade all the species, really. But the wolf people are known in the Swedish gaming from the 80s and 90s. And also in my novels, I have wolf people. So I've thought a lot of how they would function, Like in the novels, they come to the queen of the wolf people. And when you go into her, come to her court, you have to go and pee on a pole to announce yourself. And then somebody smells the pole and says who you are.
Is that correct? Yeah.
like dogs would do it.
Actually, wanted to go back and talk for a second for your work outside of RPGs, like fantasy novels, writing lyrics for band Солов'їною. I guess they are based on your novels, yeah? The name.
Yeah, the first novel in the series called Svavelvinter, yes. So, and that the funny thing with Svavelvinter is that is something I wrote in 3 months, I think in 1986. Between two jobs, okay, so I'll try to make this adventure. And then it stuck with me, so I wrote a sequel to Svavelvinter and so on. But then the name Svavelvinter has returned. So my first novel was called Svavelvinter in this world. And then... of course, Free League started making a game called Svavelvinter, which is set from the novels. And then I found out there's a hard rock metal band called Svavelvinter. So I got hold of this guy, who is a Swedish guy too. Well, he was a role-playing gamer, and he thought Svavelvinter sounded nice, so he made his own band called that. And then we made an album, a full-length album, metal album, and I wrote all the lyrics, and he made all the music. And that turned out really interesting. So that is also based on the novels. So,
nice. I think they're not available in English, yeah?
No, the record is, the album is in Swedish, but you can listen to it. It's metal music. You can't hear what he says anyway, so.
Yeah, but the novels, they're not...
No, only in Swedish so far. In Danish, actually, too. They've been translated to Danish. But one of my dreams... is of course that to get the novels translated into English and any other language. So I hope, and perhaps if we can, it might be that we will release Svavelvinter game for Dragonbane. We've been discussing it. Nothing is decided. But in that case, I'm hoping that people will get interested, and perhaps I can get the novels published eventually. But that's like a dream. So if it happens,
you mean Dragonbane rule set, but Svavelvinter setting?
Yeah, exactly. So that would be a setting within that game.
Nice.
Yeah, I hope so. But we don't know that. But we've been talking loosely about it. So I hope that will come about. So, yeah.
Actually, about translations, are there any plans to translate Forbidden Lands into more languages?
I think it's what I've heard. I don't see the production. I mean, I'm just a freelancer from Free League. But they tell me that it's translated into like 8 languages. So I know it's translated to German and Spanish and Portuguese, French, I think, Italian, and somewhere Korean, I think, and so on. So it's just pretty well spread. English, of course. It's written in English. I write it in Swedish and then translate it into English simultaneously. So I usually come up, when I make a name in Swedish, I usually come up with an English version of the name as well. Like Marigal works in both, of course, but some names, of course, don't work in English, so I have to come up with an English version.
Yeah, it would be nice someday, maybe read in Ukrainian Forbidden Lands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's... it's just, the thing is, these translations are usually made by a third party in that country. So, like, I think it is in Germany, they have a publisher that translates into German and then publish it as a third party product. So Free League doesn't do that themselves. So they do the English and Swedish version, only. That's what I think. I'm not part of the company, so I don't know.
Yeah, actually that goes for a lot of Free League's games, as I noticed that you do stuff in Swedish and then you have to wait a bit until it gets translated into English.
But the Forbidden Lands gets translated immediately.
Yeah, that's nice.
Before it's published at the same time in English and Swedish, I think so. It's easy for me, of course, to write in my own language. You get more fluent in that. But of course, I mean, everybody in Sweden basically speaks English pretty well. So it's not that hard to come up with suggestions. But I've tried to write actually gaming material in English, and it's much slower and it doesn't get as good to me. So it's easier for me to write in Swedish, and then somebody else translates it. So, and then what I do more, I'm a veterinarian from start, but I haven't worked in veterinary practice for a long time. I came into the computer industry for 10 years, and I worked in a company called MySQL, which we had people in Ukraine as well at the time. Very international a database company. And then now I just started writing for computer games as well. I've done that on and off before, and now I'm engaged again in the computer game. That's pretty fun too. So you try to come up with a world there as well.
Video games?
Yeah, video game, yeah.
Yeah, which video games maybe?
No, well, we're starting on a game, and that's what that is.
Your experience, okay.
So it's a company called Fat Shark in Stockholm that they have published video games with Warhammer 40,000, Vermintide, and some other titles. I haven't played them. But this is something new that is still very hush-hush.
Nice. Actually, about the playing, I wanted to ask you if you play any RPGs yourself. Like right now, we talked about Dragonbane the Monarch previously, about D&D, like any other favorites.
Yeah, I don't play very much any longer. I played a little Forbidden Lands with my children. They are grown-ups now. So I play with them and their friends, but not that much. I've never been a rule guy, really. I get bored when I have to read through rules, but I'd like to play more. But it's we played a lot when I was younger, so that's how it started. But not that much anymore. Nowadays, when I want to relax, I play computer games more. But then sometimes, like Mörk Borg, you know that one?
Yeah, I heard about it. Like impressive art, very famous.
As soon as I saw it, I backed it because I didn't intend to play it. I just thought it was so cool design, so I had to back this.
Yeah, actually, I know a lot of people who just collect books because they're pretty, and maybe I will play them someday.
Very good art. But then we play some board games as well with my children. But I'm a very bad loser, so I try to stay with where you compete against the game instead now, like what's it called, Pandemic.
Oh, I played that one once.
We play together against the game.
Yeah, I totally more into cooperative games because you don't have like to lose win. Yeah, I have one more interesting question. It's something I noticed that another game master also wanted to ask it. Like when you read through descriptions of the various skin in the player's handbook, you see that they very much hate each other because of all they did to themselves in the past. But then the group of players, when they play together, it can have members of different kin in it.
Yes.
And is it intended? Is overcoming like this hate towards each other should be part of the group coming together? Or?
I think that can be tricky because if group members hate, if you start to stab each other in the back, that's not a good sign when you play. That's my experience. Because somebody might die and then that person comes back as another person and wants revenge. So that's not a good idea. But I think I built most kins hate each other, like you say, or at least dislike each other. And I think what I aimed was to get a lot of conflict, because conflict brings, worry. Yeah. It might have been a little too much. I don't know. But at the same time, you can circumvent it. You don't have to play it out. The group can be, even if they are from species that dislike each other, they can be friends because of circumstances. They might have been captured together, or they might be somebody helped the other one and saved his life or so. So I think you can overcome that pretty easily. But I know it's been problems, but I don't see a problem. If you're a little inventive, you can come up with reasons why they go together. So yeah. But also some have said if you play an orc, for instance, I think the orcs are probably the most sympathetic kin in the game to me. Elves are not very nice. Humans are definitely not very nice. And dwarves keep to themselves. But orcs are kind of the victims that has been treated badly by everybody else. So, but everybody hates them. If they come to village, people don't like them. So you have to, of course, come up with solutions. But I think that's what role-playing gaming is. You come up with solutions to problems, right? So there's a lot of problems in the Forbidden Lands, of course, yes.
Yeah, what to solve. Actually, very much like elves, they have like such unique history compared to other games, like how them came to be and the factions inside of them. It's very interesting.
Yeah, no, like you say, there are factions within each. Like all elves don't think the same. I mean, some want to help the others and some hate the others. And the orcs are, some are very militant and some wants to build a civilization, etc. So you can also pick whatever you want there. And of course, the humans hate each other, basically, all of them. So there are different groups all over, which is, unfortunately, that reflects the world we're in, I think. So it's... and also that this unreliable narrator style that people tell their own stories, they interpret history the way it suits them and their interests, which is something you can see, and of course, in everyday politics today as well.
So actually about this unreliable narrator thing, if you talk about Legends, we of course got it here because it's Legends, it survived some time, and the information changed. But when we talk about DM section, it has to be the absolute truth, or not always.
Yeah, I mean, when something happens and things you encounter are true, of course, but then again, they can also always be interpreted in another way, So you think, like you have this basic story in the game that humans came over the oceans to this land, led by a raven god that held a snake in its claws. And then, as you know, there are some that think the raven was the god, and some think the snake was the god, and a third think that no, it wasn't the animals, it was the material that they were made of, and they hate each other, of course, and kill each other. But then in the Blood March, you get a new version of the story where it instead is said that, no, the humans were chasing the raven that had stolen the worm. And you get a new story, and then these churches that are built upon the raven and the worm, they don't want to hear this, because it doesn't suit them. They have built their own whole world on the story, and if they hear this new story, they will probably kill the one who tells the story because it's heresy. So that's the way it works. So while the basic facts might be the same, they are wildly differently interpreted. So, and that's the way I like it.
Yeah, actually, I like this in the section about the gods, that we have these different interpretations and different religions. It actually also reminds very much of history.
Yeah, it is very much like it is in our world. And also people ask me, do the gods actually exist, or is it just imagination? Well, that's for you to find out. I will not give you the answer. I might have an answer, but I think it's better that you try to investigate and see what happens. And then, of course, the less I say, the more I can develop later in the game.
Yeah.
So I don't really like games where you get all the information. This is the god, this and that, and he sits on his throne there and there. And magic works like this. You get these points, or you drink mana, or whatever. I want it to be mysterious, because then you can interpret it later.
Yeah, it's actually a hard thing to do when writing a setting, like to divide between this, like how much to give game masters so they have something to build upon, and how much like conceal, so they have room for interpretation. Yes. So how do you draw this line? You try to get some mysteriousness?
I always go for the mysteriousness. But again, as you know, there was a television series called Lost.
Yeah.
It was very complicated and got very mysterious. And then it just ended and you didn't get the answers. And they interviewed the creators of that series and they say, we don't have an idea. We have no idea what happened. And I don't like that. I like, as a creator, I should have an idea about what might have happened. That's not necessarily what I tell people. But I have to have some kind of line, because you don't want it to all be fluid or floating about, because you want some, like you say, you want some things are certain. We know this, but we don't know what to do with it, but we know that this is the case. For instance, I don't know if you watch horror movies, there was a horror movie called Elm Street, Terror on Elm Street.
No, I haven't watched that one.
Okay, anyway, the monster in those movies was a person that lived in the dreams. And once people fell asleep, he could come into the dreams and kill them and do whatever he wanted. And the problem with that was that he was almighty in the dreams. So you never knew what was true and what was they were dreaming. And then it gets uninteresting. You have to have some rules to get it interesting. It's like playing a game too. if there are no rules, well, you can do anything. Well, it doesn't get interesting. So you have to have restrictions that are just enough to sort of whet your appetite and get you to think of what to do. So that's what I'm aiming for in the setting as well. You should have some basic facts, but you should never be sure, is it the whole story or am I missing something here? And that goes for the gods very much. I want to have them mysterious too. I mean, look at gods in our world. How much do we actually know? I mean, there are lots of theories and claims, but we don't know. And that's the way I like it also in the fantasy game. So
Yes, but I think one thing that you did differently, I usually notice that in settings when they presented to the player, game master, sorry, so they have brief history description, but Forbidden Lands, it has this huge history section for the game masters.
I think I got carried away a little there.
That's nice. Yeah, it's actually nice to see a different approach.
Yeah, it is a little too long. I can admit that. But I think they let it get away with it. And it's good for me because I make a setting in my head and then I can make, take what I do now. When I do this Alderland expansion, which is the next one, I go back to the story, the history, and take out new things that haven't been used. So I can go back to the history and sort of expand it, certain aspects of it. So it's pretty useful anyway, but it was a little too long, I can admit to that.
Actually, Forbidden Lands, it supports different settings. So have you thought about using Swallowwinter as setting for Forbidden Lands?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there are, the Bitter Reach is written by Magnus Sæther, which is a friend of mine, but I was not involved in that. We did discuss a little, to get it not to conflict. But I'd love to see other areas. But I have this Ravenland, Aslin, Alderland trilogy. I see those three expansions as trilogies. They will sort of connect. And then I can see beyond that, I could go on perhaps three more, but we don't know if that will come about. I think I have so much work with that, so I can't really start to think of another setting. But in that case, I would probably start with another game instead. Start anew with something else. But I could build a lot. I could go on building the Forbidden Land setting if that's what Free League wants, and if I have the time and the health and so on.
Yeah, what about your setting? For example, why Dragonbane and not Forbidden Lands? Because Forbidden Lands supports different settings as the rules.
Yes, that's true. It's Dragonbane. They don't want a world currently, I understand. They want to have a pretty. You can just be locally. They have this valley, which is just. We don't know anything about the world outside that, I think. And they might eventually come out that they need a world, perhaps. And we'll see about that. And so, I mean, if they want me to think about that, sure. You can, of course, do different settings in a world. I mean, Forbidden Land started with this one map, and then we add maps. So that's a way to build it. I don't think Dragonbane will do the same. You will probably more. When they decide on a world, they will have big world maps, I think, and then fill it in with different things. So, and that was the original Drakar och Demoner. It didn't have a world, and then they decided we need a world, so they made a sort of fantasy Europe. And I actually drew that map and wrote the history for that continent. So, but I don't think they will use that one. They will probably come up with something new.
So you usually prefer to start small, start with a small region and then expand?
Yeah, I think that's a better version. We used to say that we had this other guy who wrote things for the old game, that he started by making the entire map and then having regions, and here they fish and here they have mines and so on. I like to start with the drunk wizard waking up in a waste barrel somewhere and he doesn't know where he is. And then, okay, so what's around me? And then you build from there and sort of expand, I think. But you have to have both ways, actually.
Yeah, because they're not restricted in the future. If you want to say east of Ravenland, we have this new continent. Okay, here it is. Yeah, because we haven't defined it previously.
And then also, if you build something very strictly, it's very hard to come up with new ideas to sort of turn it. When you build a certain complexity, you start to see patterns that you didn't see from start. And it's impossible to see those patterns from start because they are not there. You have to come up with a certain complexity. And then I like to be able to grab that complexity and do something new with it. And if you made it too obvious what everything is, then you can't do that because you're locked in. I want to be very flexible. That's also why I have this unreliable style, and I only tell the gamers and the game masters as much as I had to, because that keeps me flexible and I can come up with new things, which I think people like. I hope. If they don't like it, there are other games that are more strict. So that's the way. That's the style I'm writing.
Yeah, I think you showed us very good example with this fourth story about the origin of humans, like how you were able to insert it because it was not strictly defined earlier.
Yeah, exactly. But again, if you like another game, I mean, this is my style of writing, and others like another style. That's fine. I mean, you have to do what you like yourself. I think if you want to write, if you're writing games too and settings, you have to like it. Otherwise, it doesn't turn out well. So you have to be passionate about what you do. I think so.
Yeah. So yes, thank you. It was very interesting perspective about writing words and fantasy novels.
It's an honor to be here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.